Thank you. I want to just, for all summary, uh, it's this is yours. This is my experience, and it is true, and probably, a little bit beautified by the producer, but I appreciated that. Of course, my dream is to change the world, yes. It's up to me to decide how much of that dream is realistic, because I don't want to suffer because of this dream. It's too good. And it's up to me to decide how much of this dream is possible. But process it, think about it. I want to just say, relevant to this talk, that like the lotus flower that is born out of mud, honoring our most painful experiences will allow us to birth beauty and joy. This is a quote by Debbie Ford, but I took the freedom, the liberty of adding, has to be done gently and with the help of others, with the help from others. And let me tell you, life is way harder than cancer. This is what I tell everyone, and I'm not done. I don't know what happened there. It was pretty awesome, if you ask me, but life is so difficult. So this is again, the realization that happiness, resilience, and well-being is not a distant goal. I need to keep on practicing. I learn a lot, and I still have to do better. So CBCT has all these wide range of applications. There's empirical data published already about all these results: decrease in resting levels of cortisol, decreased inflammation response, decreased levels of C-reactive protein, increased activity in the brain area associated with empathy, increased empathetic accuracy. There's also a lot of psychological effects, decreased depression, increased hopefulness, decreased loneliness. All that has been published. I want to bring your attention over an interesting finding here: increased amygdala response to suffering without increased depression. It was first a very surprising piece of data, because if you know, the amygdala is the fight or flight organ, the alert, fear organ in the brain. So we tend to think the lower the activity, the better. It is the case for people with PTSD. They have an overactive amygdala. So, but compassion actually increased the activity of the amygdala, but without increased depression. And in reality, this actually explains very well what compassion does. Compassion is not anesthesia. Anesthesia doesn't work in the real world. We need to face our real problems. We need to magnify them. We don't need to decrease their value. We need to feel them. So it doesn't come with a pleasant and peaceful bliss, although ultimately it does. When we address them, this is what compassion does. It helps you see clearly to address what it is that you have to address. And actually, I work with parents of children with autism who are anxious out of their mind, and I tell them, how on earth wouldn't you be anxious? Embrace that. Do something with that. Don't, pretend that life is going to be, an all smiling contest, because it's not, but it's better, it's good. But you have this that you need to face. This is, in my opinion, what resiliency is about, and what we can help doing this rehabilitation work with people. Embracing to do better. But yes, we need to accept, we need to feel uncomfortable in order to address what it is that we need to address. And the range of applications, also my studies, still not published, but I'm very eager, very excited about what I'm going to publish in the next few years. You're going to see, it's going to be out there, because I am so excited. So my experience with parents and therapists, of children with autism. I'm going to talk about that at the end of this presentation, but there are applications with patients with PTSD, with HIV positive patients, with patients with depression, breast cancer survivors, bone marrow transplant patients, of course students, and then physicians, doctors, nurses, you name it. I wanted to talk a little bit about the potential transformational effect that this may have at all levels of society. I've talked about how self-regulation, emotional regulation, and social regulations are really the same thing. We feel better if others feel better. Others feel better if I feel better. That transcends at all levels, at a systemic level, and we have the ability to start changing within to have an impact on our society. We are all very aware of the healthcare industry crisis, the focus on productivity and profitability, because it has to be sustained, which doesn't really go along without the human care that we would like to offer. So what do we do about that? We all need to change, and it's going to start not at the government level, although that is going to be necessary at some point. I don't even know, but I know how to change myself, and that is having already an impact around me. I see it, and I'm going to talk to you a little bit about that. And let me tell you that, again, I want to quote Martin Luther King, who is a personal hero of mine, because when he was talking about nonviolence, he was talking first to his own people. And I think it's very tempting to think that he was talking to, people that believe in segregation and how mistaken they were. But he was talking to them as well, but also he was talking to the people that are being oppressed and encouraging them to understand their enemy, their adversary. Not to condone their actions, not to approve their actions that were mistaken, but to correct them and address them from a place of understanding. This is so hard to do. I don't even claim I can do that, but we can practice and get better. And Martin Luther King, and think about this quote, talking to people that were oppressed. People fail to get along because they fear each other. They fear each other because they don't know each other. We don't know each other because we don't communicate with each other. If we keep this in mind, we could truly begin to see the other, even our oppressor, without fear and less of a stranger, and talk to them and address their mistaken actions from a point of love and compassion. And this was his belief in nonviolence and how transformative it could be. We could talk at length about this. Even the Dalai Lama and Martin Luther King said, sometimes anger, violence may be necessary, but this is a very last resource. And he said as well, if we are to have peace on earth, this is our planet, ladies and gentlemen. This is getting serious. If we are to survive, our loyalties must transcend our race, our tribe, our class, and our nation. And this means we must develop a world perspective. This is at a systemic level what compassion can do. Let me guide you through the last slides and show you an example of what it's doing in my own environment with these parents and therapists. And I have data that I will publish very soon. So I don't know how familiar you are with autism, but this is an example. Try to think of your own group of people you work with. Parents of children with autism have it really hard. It's hard to be a parent. Those of you who are parents know it, but it's apparently harder to have a child with autism, even harder than having a child with another type of special needs. They have higher incidence of depressive symptoms and stress. But actually there's a connection, and you would not surprise any parent of a child with autism by saying this. There's a connection between their stress, their interaction with their child, and the child's dysfunctional behavior. The worse they are, the worse their child. But the worse their child is, the worse they are. And then we request a lot. We providers are responsible for asking and asking more and more from parents and not providing enough support. Go to see a psychologist if you can afford it. It will be helpful. Oh yeah, there are some support groups that, well, I don't want to get into detail, but you know, they're not for everyone. And we need a systematic training. We needed something systematic to do in those support groups. So we ask them to do a lot because yes, parent participation is important when we address any type of special needs in children. Well, this is the story on the side of the providers. We are not much better off. And you as well, working in this field, are not much better off. We are actually in the field of medicine, in rehabilitation medicine. We are even more stressed than teachers. Can you believe that? That's what this piece of evidence says. I mean, we can discuss about it, but we are not in good shape. And we are providing this care to others. We are wanting to do this service with our best intentions and burning out while we do it. Healthcare professionals are at higher risk of severe distress, burnout, and mental and physical illness than employees of any other industry. And surprise, I'm sure you're not, it can adversely affect the quality of patient care, of course. Now, at a systemic level, autism, I don't know if you're aware of the prevalence of autism. It's right now 1 in 59 children and on the rise. But then there's a systemic racism in autism. In addition to all that stress, there's disparities. There's inequality. It's 1.2 times more likely to diagnose a white child than a black child with autism, and 1.5 times more likely to diagnose a white child than a Hispanic child with autism. And that has been interpreted as a differential access to health care, which by itself is a little bit like racism, right? But then there are more fine details in this. Actually, racial disparities affect groups with a lower socioeconomic status only. So there's more racism in lower social class. And then it affects children with no cognitive delays. And I'll tell you why, because it's easier to see intellectual delays, but not so easy to see autism. So it affects mostly those groups, people without cognitive delays and lower socioeconomic levels. Let me talk to you very briefly about this slide that shows the bias that we providers have, and I include myself. So it's actually, in this case, it was not race, it was socioeconomic level, which made providers diagnose autism more easily. The closer the bar to the access level, the more likely to diagnose autism, given the same symptoms, which could be actually related to ADHD or autism, and the only differences in the vignettes were the race of the child, black or white, and then the occupation of their parents, an attorney and an architect, a stay-at-home mom and a truck driver. That actually made a difference, showed the bias that we professionals have when we look at exactly the same symptoms, and I see myself doing that as well. I see a little child coming from rural Georgia, passing their grades, and I say, they're doing fine. Well, mom says, no, this child is strange. And I say, well, what do you want? No autism. We do that. And then more about systemic racism in autism. African American children are more likely to be diagnosed with something other than autism upon initial evaluation, like behavior, disruptive behavior. And African American and Hispanic children are less likely to have personal physicians and parents report, sorry, I'm going too fast. They are less likely to have personal physicians, and parents report feeling that physicians are not so sensitive to family values and customs. Let me give you a very simple piece of data. Right now, the population in the Atlanta metropolitan area is 5.6 million, of which 11% are Hispanic. You know how many psychologists who speak Spanish there are in the Atlanta area? I probably know all of them, and they are less than 10, because we created a LinkedIn group. And this is reality. It's nobody's fault that, you know, the Spanish population is surging and there are not enough Spanish-speaking professionals, but we can all learn about cultural competence, about compassion. We can all learn to be a little bit less biased, and it's with practice, and starts by acknowledging that we are. And let me give you an example of how this works. I want to bring your attention over social competence. Actually, we took free based questionnaires on free-based questionnaire online on cultural competence. And we actually did the training with providers, therapists of children with autism spectrum disorder. We took pre and post measures, very simple design. I'm not very knowledgeable about statistics, but I could do that. So we had a control group, people that took the questionnaires, didn't do any training, and then we had the experimental group that actually did the training. And the results could not be better. We looked at acceptance of the child's condition. We looked at behavioral flexibility, the ability to shift your response, the ability to inhibit one response that you want to give. This is executive function. This is what we call psychologists executive function. And we also use questionnaires on empathy and compassion. I have to say, they are not so solid. They don't have such strong psychometric measures because they are starting to be developed. And we looked as well at stress. The brief symptom inventory looked at depression, anxiety, somatization, and we had a perceived stress scale. Again, all these significant changes in acceptance was marginally significant. The executive function questionnaires were all significant. In empathy and compassion, it was significant in personal distress. Cultural competence changed. And I'm so tired of attending workshops on cultural competence and everybody thinking, oh yeah, we need to do better. What are we doing? Let's do something, for goodness sake. And then the brief symptom inventory also got significant in 3 out of the 4 subscales and the perceived stress scale. Now, this is where my heart lies, in the suffering of the parents that really we cannot fix, we cannot heal. They have to heal themselves. I can accompany them. But, and let me tell you, it's such a small end. We actually collected, we recruited 15 parents, but they are so stressed, out of their minds. And it took 30 minutes to fill out the questionnaires, but even 30 minutes was too much for many of these parents. But I treasure the data on these 6 parents without a control group, because honestly, I didn't have the heart to make anybody wait. If they were interested, they were in. And I report the effect size as well, because I think it's so big. I had significant results in all these measures in acceptance, again, behavioral flexibility or executive function, in that empathic concern subscale of the compassion questionnaire, in the parenting sense of competence, social competence, how they felt about parenting their child. There was a significant increase and an effect size of 2.19. That's huge. And then this, actually the parenting stress of competence is a very well-known questionnaire used in autism, as well as the parenting stress index that actually assesses stress specifically for parents of children with autism spectrum disorder. We got significant results in most of the subscale, as well as the parent stress scale. And this is, of all, my favorite result. The ABC is a measure, a parent-reported measure, that is used to assess outcomes in children that go through intervention. You ask the parents, do you think your child is doing better or worse? And it's used again to assess the success of an intervention. We control in these 6 families that the children had not had any changes in their intervention plan the past 6 months. As a result of them feeling happier, more relaxed, healthier, they saw their children's symptoms better. Actually, there was a 2.16 size, effect size, significant change in how they perceived their symptoms. So to all effects, the children were doing better. This is how working with him affect everyone else. Others and the outer environment, the system environment. So I'm almost done here. I want to help us all feel the intellectual again by bringing this testimonial of one of my parents. Forgive me for calling her my parent. One of the parents that participated in this study, who didn't fill out the questionnaires, by the way. But she actually gave us permission to use her real name. Her name is Fina, and actually she's the main character in a little story in a book by Marchand, a book that I strongly recommend. If you came to this talk, this is your type of book as well. It's called Cure, A Journey into the Science of Mind Over Body. So the testimonial says, the journalist actually interviewed this parent in my office, and I remember this interview. We didn't really talk about all these things during the course, so I was fascinated by these words. During the course, Fina says she realized that autism had come to define her children in her eyes. All you see is a burden. It was robbing me of so much I could give to them. Instead of being overwhelmed by her own stress and misery, she started to view the world from her kids' perspective and to see them as people in their own right. In the class, I released a feeling of entitlement, she says. That is so universal. We all who have gone through something difficult, we say, why me? And our patients, our clients, also go through that. Why on earth me? Why? She released that feeling that she was supposed to have a life without these challenges. She had always tried to be a good person. I thought, this isn't what I put into the pot. Why am I getting this out? Then she realized these special beings were given to me because of what I put into the pot. I want to add something that the journalist didn't write down, but I remember. She said, I would not want anybody else to take care of my children. And with that single thought, much of the stress in Fina's life disintegrated. This is not a miracle story. It happens once, then you go back to feeling miserable and uncomfortable. And that's why you need to go back to having that aha moment. But that aha moment is right there. She needs to cultivate it. She needs to repeat it to create that solid neural circuit that will make her resilient. Instead of feeling bitter and resentful, she was enjoying being with them. So the conclusions. We have talked at length about the emotional, and I think we have enough evidence to talk about the vulnerability of us providers and the clients that we see. But also to talk about that it is possible to overcome that vulnerability, and the secret is honoring precisely what we try to run away from. But of course, we cannot do it alone. We need the help of others, and we have to do it gently. To move on, to see the light at the end of the tunnel, to adapt, not to go back. We are never going back, to adapt. Then I think we have enough data to say that CBCT is a feasible training for many different clinical and non-clinical populations, and that CBCT has potential promising effects on self-regulation and social competence. It's your turn to feel the intellectual, to do something, I don't know what, with this. It's yours. I need to say a few words of gratitude to the Marcus Autism Center, the place that gave me the opportunity to this work with the families, and the Center for Contemplative Science and Compassion-Based Ethics at Emory University, a place where I learned CBCT. Thank you to my supervisor, Amy Klein, former supervisor, Celine Saulnier, Jim Herndon, a friend and a mentor, and Professor Dr. Negi, who taught me CBCT. And thank you as well to teaching assistants, the postdocs, the interns, volunteers, and compañeros, which is a word for companions, which comes from compassion and community in Spanish. because it takes a village to do anything. And last but not least, I want to honor the families and the children and the therapists that taught me so much more than I was able to offer them. The last two slides are, I think, mandatory. You need what you need to do. You know, I hope you know what you need to do to claim the continuing education credit. You have to basically evaluate the course. I think that's it. Thank you for your attention, and I will welcome questions.